All right, welcome in to another episode of the Penguin Nation Fans Podcast. As always, I am your host, Gino Leone. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Whitetown Nation. And don't forget to follow me over on Red Shirt Sports as well. Joining us today is a very special guest, one that has done tremendous work throughout his career and has become the voice that us YSU fans have come to know and love. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome onto the program radio play-by-play announcer for the YSU men's basketball team, Robb Schmidt. Robb, thanks for coming on, man. How are you feeling today?
We're good. It was a good weekend for the YSU football team, so that kind of sparks everybody and keeps everybody happy on a good Sunday morning.
Yeah, for sure, man. That was awesome.
Yeah.
You up in the press box watching that one?
No, usually on football games, I have different responsibilities than I would for basketball. So
Okay.
working in the athletic marketing department, I kind of help as one of the game managers, oversee things that go on the field, recognitions, in-game contests, taking care of the officials. So I'm usually, handling tailgating. So I'm usually running around quite a bit. By the fourth quarter, it lets me settle down and kind of watch the final period.
All right, that's awesome. All right, so before we jump into previewing the season, because I'm excited to talk about this team, man, we have a really good team.
Yeah.
But I want to take a quick moment to rewind and talk about your path, your journey, and how you got to this point in your life, specifically the broadcasting aspect of things and being that play-by-play announcer. So, at what point in your life did you know that, hey, this is what I want to do with my life? Was there a specific moment in time? It doesn't have to be like a day or time, like at this day, like I know I want to do this, but just a general time frame when you said, hey, like I want to get into this industry, man, and be a broadcaster.
Well, it's pretty simple for me. I can tell you the exact place and virtually the exact time. Gino, it was 1976. I was in I was in sixth grade. I was 12 years old. Um, I was at my grandmother's house in her kitchen, and at that time, the Cleveland Cavaliers were playing in the Richfield Coliseum. It was called the Miracle in Richfield, and I remember being in my grandmother's kitchen listening to the playoff series against the Washington Bullets, and Joe Tate was the broadcaster. And as I was listening to the game and the way he presented it, I knew that night that's what I wanted to do. So from 12 years old until now, I've always had an opportunity to kind of pursue my dream. So I've been very fortunate. I had an opportunity later in life to meet Joe Tate, became friends of his. He wrote me a letter of recommendation at one time. So, I was really, really fortunate. I've kind of been in the right place at the right time. I came out of college at Kent State, was hired by my hometown radio station, but not as a broadcaster. I first got in the business in sales. I was an account executive. I took advice from Joe Tate. I kind of told him I had two opportunities coming out of college, but I wanted to pursue broadcasting because that's what I went to school for. And I told him about this job interview, and he said to me, he says, if you can sell it, they'll find a place and a way to keep you. So I said, okay. So I went and sold advertising for a year. I was not getting into broadcasting yet. I did have an opportunity to kind of go out with the guys who were doing high school football at that time. And they'd been doing it for 40 years in Warren. They were legends themselves. And they were nice enough to let me go watch how they set up the equipment, how they do the broadcast. But I didn't know much about Youngstown. I grew up in Warren. I was working in Warren. And I felt that if I wanted to broaden my career, I needed to go find out about Youngstown. So I took another job at a radio station in Youngstown, and again, in sales. But these guys that were doing their high school games didn't let me go with them. They were like, no, we don't want you to come with us. And I thought, all I want to do is just watch you work. So, and here's the twist, so I leave there in about 6 months. I go back to my original radio station. And before I left, Joe Tate's words were very prophetic. Before I left there, after a year at WRRO, they took me to their home headquarters down in East Liverpool. Now, this is before I left. And they said, look, if you stay, we'll guarantee you can take over for the guys who are currently doing the games. And I said, well, that could be a year, that could be 5 years, that could be 10 years. You don't know. So that's when I left, but I came back. I was fortunate enough that they were kind enough to bring me back. And a month later, after I come back, the guy who had been doing the games retired right in the middle of the season, right in the mid-season, retired. And I was able to step in. My first half a year, I did color analyst work. They didn't like the play-by-play guy. So the following year, 1988, I moved into the play-by-play role. And I stayed in Warren from 88 to 95. In the meantime, I dabbled in some television. Um, in 95, I left. I didn't like the direction of the radio station I was at. So I left, and a couple of years later, I had gotten a full-time gig in television. And then in 2002, good friend of mine, Rick Love, asked me if I would like to become the radio play-by-play voice for men's basketball. They were changing radio stations. They were going from Cumulus to, at that time, Clear Channel, which is now iHeart. And I checked with my news director because I wasn't sure if they'd let me get out of the office as much as necessary. And he said, we love it. It'd be a great marketing tool. If they see you out, if they hear you, they'll think of you. They'll think of the television station. Great marketing tool. So thanks to my news director, Nick Matesi, he let me do this. And that was, this going on my 24th season now. And in '07, I went back to Rick Love and I said, I'd really like to work here full time. And he brought me back in the athletic marketing role. So I went back into sales. I really missed that when I was in television full time, and I wanted to get back into sales. So, it's a big circle, really, Gino. From the time that Joe Tate told me if you can sell it, they'll find a way to keep you. That's kind of been my whole life.
Thanks for sharing that, man. That's a cool journey for sure. I really had no idea about that, so that was so cool to see how it sort of all led up to being the play-by-play guy for YSU and just your experience in sales. So thanks for sharing that. Let's talk about a bit about what that looks like today. Obviously, like you're the play-by-play guy for YSU. What goes into like preparing for a given game week or a given game? Are there like specific things like you have to know? Just kind of take us through the process of what goes on behind the scenes and getting ready to sound good on the air.
Gino, that's really the most important thing, to tell you the truth. Um, you know, I put in I put in usually 2 hours per team in prep time. Um, and now that I'm working in college athletics, and thanks to the internet and websites, preparation has become a lot easier. When I first broke in, you had to go to the library and you had to go dig up newspapers. You know what I mean? I was grabbing papers out of Cleveland and Canton and trying to find box scores, and they don't even put box scores in the papers anymore, let alone online. So, preparation at that time was a lot more difficult, a little more strenuous. Now, you can troll the internet and you can find all kinds of websites and polls and, a lot of columns. So, depending on, and I make sure I let these gentlemen know, depending on who the athletic communications directors are, your job can be a lot easier, it can be a lot harder. And I've let a lot of them know who are very, very good at how they've saved me time. And I've become friends with those guys because I appreciate the work they do, like a Trevor Parks or a Jamie Hall or a John Vogel, Dre Smith, those guys that work at Youngstown State. And there's a lot of them across the Horizon League who are very good. But I usually put in about 2 hours per team. That includes points, rebounds, free throw percentage, shooting percentage, career high in scoring, game high in scoring for that season. And then you always try to find little nuggets. And that can come from game notes, and that can come from just kind of trolling around, the internet. And you type in a guy's name and little things will come up. Maybe he was recruited by this school. Maybe he transferred. I found a story about a guy at Green Bay a year ago who, when he was being recruited by Oklahoma State, had gotten into shooting, and it kind of waylaid his career. So you find little things like that through your prep, but that's the most important thing. There are a lot of people who think you can just show up on the day of the game, sit down, and call it, which you can, but you really don't have any familiarity with the players. It comes across that way because you have no background on them, and all you're really doing is just telling them what's going on at that moment and that day. There's always a backstory. So I think prep work is the most important thing.
All right, that's a great look into the process, man. Thanks for taking us sort of behind the curtains there. Now, last question before we get into this preview here. What would you tell a person aspiring to be a play-by-play announcer? For me, this is something I want to do when I go to college, get into something with sports broadcasting, sports journalism, something along those lines. What would you tell somebody the most valuable piece of information you could give them to be successful on their journey in pursuing this specific career path?
Well, and you've already got a leg up. Like, I didn't have the opportunity you do here. This is really good. Um, Kind of a building process, meeting people, interviewing people. Interviewing is difficult. You're doing a great job. This is not an easy thing. Some people don't always ask the right questions, or they don't ask questions. What they do is they kind of give you a statement and ask you to work off of that statement. So I appreciate what you're doing, and really, for the most part, if you're doing radio, it's more of painting the picture, making sure you're very detailed in what your call is. But the big thing stands true. You've got to give them the score of the game as much as possible. Keep them informed because not everybody's listening for the entire broadcast. They might be popping on for a couple minutes, want to hear the score. Now, when you stream these games in television, it changes. You don't talk nearly as much as you do in radio. You don't have to give the score because you got it on the screen. That's where storytelling comes in a little bit more to kind of fill the time. But really, for the most part, I think my love is radio. That's where I started. That's where I'm still working. I like the detail of it. I like the fast pace of basketball. That's why I chose basketball over football. And I'm not very good at baseball. I don't really care to do baseball. I've tried it and I'm not very good at it. But I love the pace of basketball. I love being detailed and following the game along those lines. And that's why I like radio over television, because you're more important in radio because you see in television.
All right, thanks for sharing those answers, Rob. I really appreciate it. Now let's move into the preview portion of this episode and talk some hoops. So YSU's obviously coming off of a historic season, right? Finished with an overall record of 21-13, 13-7 mark in conference play, made the Horizon League championship game for the first time in school history. Let's start here. YSU returns two huge pieces in guard Jason Nelson and forward Chris Carroll. What do their leadership roles look like this season? I know you're close to the program and following all these things. So how big of a leadership role do you see these guys embracing with so much roster turnover, especially on a year-to-year basis?
Well, it's great because I had an opportunity to watch him scrimmage Mercyhurst, and I had a chance to really see him. I hadn't seen a lot of him up until then, and Jason Nelson really looks different. He was a lot more aggressive defensively. Looked like he shot the ball better. And I've talked with some of the coaches. He's made a big leap. I was impressed with Jason Nelson and how he ran that team. Chris Carroll, if he can stay out of foul trouble, Chris took on some leadership roles, and I even told one of the assistants who had not seen it during the game because they were busy kind of mapping things out. But during one of the timeouts, Chris, while the players were on the bench sitting during a timeout, kind of went over and was talking with them because I didn't have any responsibilities that day. So I had a chance to really just kind of watch the scrimmage. And he walked over and was talking to the guys about certain plays or maybe certain defenses. But they were attentive, and he took that leadership role. So those were two huge marks I took. If you're looking at what these guys are going to do this year, Nelson and Carroll look as if they're really going to step up their game, not just on the court, but their entire role on the team.
All right, from a team chemistry standpoint, because I feel like this gets more important as the transfer portal sort of takes a stronghold over the college basketball landscape. How far along is this team in terms of connecting together and that chemistry? Because let's be honest, we have a tough opening slate, right? 6 of our first 7 games are on the road at Pitt, at Grand Canyon. There's a ton of games. So how far along is this team in terms of just getting together and meshing together?
No, I think they've come together quickly. That's the weird thing anymore is, these guys, even last year's team got along very, very well, which is one reason why they went to the championship game. And I'll jump forward here in a second. When I spoke with Gabe Dines when he decided he was going to leave for Southern Cal. His decision was difficult because the way those guys got together, he truly enjoyed that team. So, I think Ethan Faulkner's done a great job. His staff has done a great job of getting these guys together and putting them in situations that they can become friends. They do a lot of things together. They do a lot of bonding sessions. So I think they've gotten together very, very quickly. I think they get along very well. When you see them on the court, they kind of joke around. The big test will be this, and I haven't seen it yet. Won't see it maybe till the second, third game when you get on the bus. That to me is usually a telltale sign when those guys get on the bus. Where do they sit? Who's the last guy off the bus? Do they get off the bus together? Who pairs up with whom? You start to see some friendships develop that way. But so far, I've everything looks as if everybody gets along great, and I think they've meshed really, really well, and I think they understand their roles quickly.
What transfer portal additions do you expect to make a big impact this season? I feel like we have an incredibly deep backcourt and front court guys that can rotate in, but maybe if you could narrow it down to a couple of guys that have really impressed you since coming here to YSU and transferring here.
No, because there's 11 new guys on this team. The two big transfers that I think popped some eyes early was Vlad Celeridze, the transfer from UT Martin, and Bryson Dawkins, the transfer from Houston Christian. Now, I think Vlad will be that impact player. He will take the role of what we've seen out of that four person for Youngstown State, like a Ziggy Reed, an Adrian Nelson, a DJ Burns. He'll kind of take on that role of maybe becoming the next double-double guy. Bryson Dawkins will become the next Ty Harper, but a better version of Ty Harper. I think he shoots it better. He's just as athletic. I think he can defend better. But the other guys that they were able to grab out of the portal, a Rich Rolfe from Charlotte is going to be a steal. Has a great shot. I really like Rich Rolfe. The kid that impressed me at the Mercyhurst scrimmage was Drew King, the transfer from Elon. I liked how he played on both sides of the ball. He shot it well. And then Tyler Robinette, who has a lot of experience winning. He comes from Idaho, which is an NAIA. They had won a national championship. He just seems to know the game. As I was watching him, I said to some of the coaches, he just is in the right place at the right time. He's not eye-popping, got soft hands, but he just knew where to be. And he ended up that game, I think he had 9 points, 9 rebounds. So, it was one of those not flashy, but productive type of guys. I'm really impressed with what they brought in.
All right, thanks for sharing those again, man. And then final question. This is a big one before we get you out of here. How does this team handle the outside noise? Obviously, coming off of a big season where we sort of elevated the program to that next level. We kind of saw this, I believe, as the 2023-2024 season after we won that Horizon League regular season championship. The team fell short in the playoffs when it came to crunch time. It kind of felt like the pressure caved in a bit against Cleveland State there. We lost in the quarterfinals. But how do you think this team is going to handle the pressure and the outside noise? Because the engagement from the community it keeps getting better as we win more basketball games. Just interested to hear your perspective on that. And I know it's a tough question, but feel free to say whatever you want.
No, you were right on the money. You were right on the money there. When they come off of that regular season championship, they brought in another new wave of players. That team that won the regular season, they pitched to them. And Jared Calhoun did a great job. He sold those guys on making history, being the first to reach the NCAA tournament. And really the first step was the first to hang a banner in that gym of winning a regular season title, which they did. The next year, the chemistry was not the same as it was on that team previously. There was some individuals, there was some individuality. There might not have been as much teamwork, and I think that's what showed up, as you had mentioned, and coming up short and not getting back to Indianapolis. Last year, Ethan Faulkner did a phenomenal job. They started slow. We were 2-5. You lose EJ Farmer, and they still found a way to get the most out of those kids. And I thought it was nothing short of miraculous that he got them to the championship game without your best player. And I said Ethan should have been the coach of the year, and I still believe that. And this year, I think those coaches make sure the kids stay grounded because it's a new crop. And really what they're all in for is they're all in to reach the NCAA tournament, Gino. I think, they understand NIL now. I think, there's no egos with that. I think they make sure of that. I think they got burnt with that the year after the regular season championship. So they learned their lesson that way. But really the pitch is reaching the NCAA tournament, becoming that first team. When I meet those kids on their recruiting trips, I tell them you can become a legend in this town. People will remember you forever. I mean, they'll bring you back 10, 25 years from now just to honor you if you can get to the big dance. And I tell them, I said, look, if you can get there, I'll put everybody's name on this roster on my tombstone. If you can get there. So that's what they buy into. That's what they're playing for it. And I think that's why you won't see a fall off this year as you did 2 years ago.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Penguin Nation Fans Podcast. Rob, thank you, sir, for coming on. I greatly appreciate it. This means a lot for me, man. To get a big interview like you on here, it means a lot, and I can't wait to see your reaction when we go dancing here in March, man. It's going to be awesome, right?
Anytime, Gino, anytime. You want to come see me, talk to me, you want to have me back on again, whatever you need, I'm there for you, buddy.
Yeah, buddy. I'll for sure be at a lot of games this year.
Good.
Sports just wrapped up for me, so I got some free time during the winter. I always make sure to go out and get in that awesome environment down there, man. So thanks for coming on. Audience, thanks for everyone for tuning in. Make sure to leave the show a 5-star review and share this out wherever you get your podcast. I'm Gino Leone. That's Robb Schmidt, and this has been the Penguin Nation Fans Podcast. Go Gwins.